Welcome to the part 3 of the Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. If you fell down yesterday, stand up today. H.G. Wells. To delve into the climax of this story, which is what part 3 of the Brothers Karamazov is centered on, we have to understand how the character Ushenka relates towards the Karamazovs pertaining to Fyodor Pavlovich and his son Dmitry Fyodorovich Karamazov. Rushenka, at 17, was betrayed by an officer and immediately afterwards abandoned by this officer. The officer had gone away and afterwards married, while Rushenka had been left in poverty and disgrace. Rushenka was then bound and sold to Kuzma Kuzmich Samsonov, a dissolute old merchant, a coarse, uneducated provincial mayor who raised Gushenka from destitution when she was 18. 4 years passed since that period of her life when Gushenka came into contact with her protector, Samsonov, and then the sensitive, injured, and pathetic little orphan became a plump, rosy beauty of the Russian type, a woman of bold and determined character, proud and insolent. Grushenka had a good head for business, was acquisitive, saving, and careful, and by fair means or foul had succeeded in amassing a little fortune. For some time past, in partnership with Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov, Grushenka had invested in the purchase of bad debts for a trifle, a tenth of their nominal value, and afterwards had made out of them 10 times their value. Fyodor Pavlovich, when he first initially came into contact with Grushenka over a piece of speculation, ended to his own surprise by falling madly in love with Grushenka. Throughout Grushenka's whole acquaintance with Fyodor Pavlovich, she was absolutely and spontaneously open with him, and Fyodor Pavlovich seemed to have been the only person in the world with whom she was so. A month ago, in town, a letter came to Gushenka, the officer who had wronged her when she was 17, 5 years ago. He was now a widower and wanted to see Gushenka. This occurrence took Gushenka's breath away, and she struggled within herself to resist going to meet with this officer. Because despite what this officer had put her through, she still yearned for him. And so, to ignore her feelings towards this officer, Grushenka decided to taunt Dmitry Karamazov into loving her so as to keep herself from running into the arms of that other. Now, what was this base plan that Dmitry had in regards towards his father? First, the corpse at Chemansya, which Fyodor Pavlovich had sent Ivan Fyodorovich, his second son, to represent him towards its sale. That land was the inherited property that Dmitry's mother, Fyodor Pavlovich's first wife, had left for her son, Dmitry, as his inheritance. Dmitry, who had also madly fallen in love with Grushenka as his father, had intended to make off with her if she one day agreed to be with him, so as to get away and put some distance between them and his father, who he saw as his rival for Grushenka's love. But before carrying out this plan, Dmitry desired to repay Katerina Ivanovna, his betrothed, the 3,000 rubles which he had given to him to send to her sister, but he had spent the money instead on his journey with Grushenka to Mokro. So being aware that his father kept that same amount, the 3,000 rubles, in an envelope to give to Grushenka, Dmitry felt like that was a last resort opportunity to acquire that money, which Dmitry felt was rightfully his. The money with his father, the 3,000 rubles that Fyodor Pavlovich kept to give to Grushenka if she came to him. Dmitry felt that that money was rightfully his because Fyodor Pavlovich, his father, had deceived him out of the ownership of his inheritance, the corpse at Chermansia. Grushenka had informed Dmitry of this officer from her past, but Dmitry had not placed any relevance on this occurrence, as he felt this officer was harmless in terms of vying for the love of Grushenka. But Dmitry read Grushenka wrongly. Grushenka had finally given in her mind and was anticipating receiving another letter from this officer so that she could go and be with him. So to get Dmitry out of the way, she deceived him about her whereabouts and left to Mokro to be with this officer. Dmitry, who had been hustling to to procure the 3,000 rubles he needed to repay his betrothed, eventually came to realize that Grushenka had deceived him. And as a man who is prone to jealous tendencies, he believed the worst outcome in his mind, that Grushenka had gone to his father, Fyodor Pavlovich, his rival. Dmitry then raced to his father's home that evening of the day Grushenka left town. He then scaled over the fence of the garden, as thinking Lizaveta had once done when she was pregnant with Smediakov, the valet. Dmitry then crouched beside the window of Fyodor Pavlovich's room and began to watch his father, Fyodor Pavlovich, who was wearing his new striped silk dressing gown and a silk cord with tassels round the waist, a clean dandified shirt of fine linen with gold studs peeped out under the collar of the dressing gown. The dressing gown. This was the very day that Ivan Fyodorovich had left for Chermansia and then changed his mind to go to Moscow to begin a new life away from Katerina Ivanovna, who he knew that he wouldn't get reciprocated love from. And the very day that Smediakov could not be on watch, as he had normally been doing to alert Fyodor Pavlovich of Grushenka's presence if she came. That day was also that very day that Smediakov was suffering from his fits. Smediakov had been experiencing numerous epileptic fits that day, but as I had mentioned in the part 2 of this series, Smediakov had informed Fyodor Pavlovich that there was a high probability of Grushenka showing up that evening, and that that's Smediakov, he had informed Grushenka towards like 2 days ago of the knocking signal so as to announce her presence. Fyodor Pavlovich was standing near the very window to which Dmitry was crouched against, watching his father. Fyodor Pavlovich was lost in thought. She may be there behind the screen. Perhaps she's asleep by now, Fyodor Pavlovich thought, with a pang at his heart. Fyodor Pavlovich moved away from the window. He's looking for her out of the window, so she's not there. Why should he stare out into the dark? He's wild with impatience, Dmitry thought. He's alone. He's alone. If she were here, his face would be different. And suddenly, making up his mind, Dmitry put out his hand and softly knocked on the window frames. On the window's frame, Dmitry knocked the signal that Fyodor Pavlovich had agreed upon with Mediakov, twice slowly, pa, pa, and then 3 times more quickly, pa, pa, pa. The signal that meant Grushenka is here. Fyodor Pavlovich started, jerked up his head, and jumping up quickly ran to the window. Dmitry slipped away into the shadow. Fyodor Pavlovich opened the window and thrust his whole head out. Grushenka, is it you? Is it you? Fyodor Pavlovich said in a sort of trembling half whisper. Where are you, my angel? Where are you? Fyodor Pavlovich was fearfully agitated and breathless. He's alone, Dmitri realized, and was positively sure about it. Where are you? Cried Fyodor Pavlovich again. And Fyodor Pavlovich thrusted his head out farther. He thrusted his head out to the shoulders, gazing in all directions, right and left. Come here. I have a little present for you. Come, I will show you. He means the 3,000, thought Dmitri. But where are you? Are you at the door? I will open it directly. And the old man, Fyodor Pavlovich, almost climbed out of the window, peering out to the right, where there was a door into the garden, trying to see into the darkness. In another second, he would certainly have run out to open the door without waiting for Gushenka's answer. Dmitri looked at his father from the side without staring. The old man's profile that he loathed so, a horrible fury of hatred suddenly surged up in Dmitri's heart. There he was, his rival, the man who had tormented him and ruined his life. This personal repulsion was growing unendurable. And in that very moment, at the pinnacle of his feelings, where he could finally act on the momentum of his emotions towards harming his father, he had a change of heart, and Dmitri then decided to leave the way he had come and escape his father's home, just as he had broken into it. And just as Dmitri was about to complete his escape, old Grigory, Fyodor Pavlovich's servant, who stayed in the lodge, had woken up and remembered that he had not locked the little gate into the garden that evening. And just as old Grigory came out of the lodge into the garden, he saw a shadow of a man moving very fast. And forgetting his back pain, old Grigory hurried to intercept the running figure. Old Grigory took a shortcut. Evidently, he knew the garden better. The flying figure went towards the bathhouse, ran behind it, and rushed to the garden fence. Grigory followed, not losing sight of him, and ran, forgetting everything. He reached the fence at the very moment the man was climbing over it. Grigory cried out, beside himself, pounced on him, and clutched his legs in his two hands. Yeah, yeah. Yes, old Grigory's foreboding was right. It was the monster, the parricide, Dmitri Fyodorovich. Parricide! Old Grigory shouted so that the whole neighborhood could hear. But Grigory had not time to shout more. He fell at once, as though struck by lightning. Dmitri jumped back into the garden and bent over the fallen man. In Dmitri's hands was a brass pestle, and he flung it mechanically in the grass. For some seconds, he examined the prostrate figure before him. The old man's head was covered with blood. Good heavens, what am I doing it for? Thought Dmitri, suddenly pulling himself together. If I have broken his skull, how can I find out now? And what difference does it make now? He added hopelessly. If I have killed him, I have killed him. You have come to grief, old man. So there you must lie, Dmitri said aloud. And suddenly turning to the fence, he vaulted over it into the lane and fell to the running. With his newfound knowledge that Grushenka was never at his father's place, Dmitri ran to Grushenka's place and questioned the servant, who then revealed to him that Grushenka had gone to Mokro to seek out that officer from her past about 2 hours ago. And then afterwards, Dmitri arranged a carriage in pursuit of the love of his life, Grushenka, at Mokro. Dmitri then arrived at Mokro at the Plastanov's inn, where he met Grushenka in company with this officer from her past and enjoying them, finding fulfillment that Grushenka was not against the presence of his company. During the course of their interactions, Dmitri then pulled this officer apart from Grushenka and offered to pay him 3,000 rubles to forget about Grushenka and leave her. This officer, who had wronged Grushenka 5 years ago, briefly considered Dmitri's offer, but realizing that Dmitri could possibly be tricking him, as Dmitri only offered part payment of the money first, while promising that the rest would be paid subsequently. The officer felt insulted by the bargain and reported Dmitry to Grushenka, to which Dmitry, trying to defend himself, made mention that the officer initially was open towards the arrangement. Grushenka, who had been frustrated by the attitude of the officer before Dmitry had joined them at the inn, took this as a final insult and had a change of heart that she wasn't indeed in love with this officer. He had become a shadow of the man she once knew, and her true lover was Dmitry Fyodorovich Karamazov. She ended her courtship with the officer at the inn and expressed her feelings to a delighted Dmitry, who then became worried that the only hindrance to his courtship towards Grushenka was the possible murder he had committed on his way to Grushenka at Mokro. But Dmitry kept this information to himself and ended up throwing a lavish party at the inn, which was then interrupted by the presence of the police captain, the inspector of police, the deputy prosecutor, and the investigating lawyer from the School of Jurisprudence, whom had arrived at the inn to inform Dmitry Fyodorovich that he has been charged with the murder of his father, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov. Dmitry was then taken aback by this news. His conscience, at the least, was free when he found out from the police captain, Mikhail Makarovich Makarov, that old Grigory was alive and recovering from the blow he had received on the head with a brass pestle by Dmitry. But he was perplexed by the news of his father's death, Fyodor Pavlovich, and that he was identified as the perpetrator of this horrible crime, although he had made mention on several occasions to the inhabitants of the town that he would kill his father one day. Dmitry sought to prove his innocence, but after his interrogation at the inn and after the examination of witnesses, all alluded to him being guilty. Dmitry was then informed by the investigating lawyer, Nikolai Pavenovich, that he was from that moment a prisoner and that he would be driven at once to the town, since at that point they were still at Mokro at the Plastanov's Inn, and there in town Dmitry would be shot up in a very unpleasant place. And then Dmitry Fyodorovich Karamazov was driven off from Mokro, escorted by the rural police officer Mavrikievich. That's it, the end of part 3. And so I'll end this vlog session with a quote by Audre Lorde. She was an American writer and professor, and it says, pain is important. How we evade it, how we succumb to it, how we deal with it, how we transcend it.